I'm live. Thank you, YouTube, for letting me know. This is Russ Rapp, and you've reached the place to be. This is my YouTube channel where we do live talks about non-duality. Sounds pretty exciting. And I also drink tea. The title of this video is Alone in Non-Duality, or All One in Non-Duality. I got the idea from a video that I watched part of recently. I think it's called Aloneness to Oneness. So it's a little bit of play on words. I kind of like playing words sometimes. So we are all one in non-duality, or no one. So if you're new to non-duality, the word obviously means not to. And I guess that's pointing to this idea of the illusion of separation. So that's what we're going to talk about in this little chat we're doing. We already have some comments from Jonas Jensen, who says, no fact about the world that says where one thing begins and another ends. Is a chair one thing, or four sticks in a board? You'd be wrong for answering. It's the same. Oneness and two-ness is the sameness. I'm not sure where the thong begins. I don't wear thongs, Jonas. There's a little misspelling there. You know, if you've been with me for a while, if you've seen some other of my videos, you know, maybe you will notice in this moment that I guess the sense that I'm feeling is kind of a reluctance to be on here talking. I don't know if it plays into the situation I'm in, where I just kind of ambivalent. I guess I'm usually sort of ambivalent about this topic, but the obvious question that people ask often is, you know, why do I keep doing these talks? And the answer is I don't really know. The ironic part, the cosmic joke in this is that I continue to do these live chats and sometimes make videos on a subject that I don't necessarily even believe. And I think, you know, for non-dual speakers, it's blasphemy to pretend that you are somehow not fully awakened or completely immersed in the eternal oneness of non-duality, where pain and suffering are now the thing of the past that doesn't exist. There is no person. There's just appearances seemingly happening. And it's just funny how ridiculous all that sounds. And I guess my message in all of that is, if you're new to non-duality, you probably think this is the most pointless conversation ever to have. But if you have learned enough about it, which doesn't take long, and have some sort of interest in the topic for whatever reason, whatever purpose or whatever you're seeking, then oftentimes the message itself of non-duality, because typically when I do these talks, it's geared towards people that are kind of somewhat in the know when it comes to non-duality, or have some basic knowledge of the topic. And I think for everyone else, it's has no meaning or purpose, and so therefore, by this point, 5 minutes in or so, they've already tuned out. So my goal in this video is to not sound super eloquent or really, if you watch YouTube tutorials on how to make good YouTube videos, part of it is sounding engaging and speaking in a certain tone and cadence. And non-duality is different in that there's non-duality, the niche of people in this category of whatever you want to categorize it as. There's its own kind of form of how you're supposed to present yourself to seem a certain way or to add to your credibility on the topic, whether it's intentional or not, whether it's authentic or not. It's not really for me to judge. I just can comment on how I observe things, how I see things being portrayed. I don't necessarily know the internal workings of other speakers. I do see that there's a tendency to act aloof or disinterested or calm or to seem like it's not even worth talking, to seem super chill. And like I said, whether or not that's authentic, I think the reaction of people is one way or another, because usually it seems like some of the negative reactions that I get to my discussions on non-duality is pointed towards me as a person, or how I'm presenting this, or whether or not I've achieved some sort of pinnacle of existence. And that plays into the whole idea of duality in and of itself, because the focus then becomes on emulating or finding the knowledge that someone else has, and not the message itself. Because I'm going to be honest with you, I talk about non-duality in these videos. I've spent many hours on this concept, and yet objectively one could argue that I don't even believe it. And that manifests in, I guess, in certain ways that can be observable, especially if you can witness my internal workings. And you could say, well, that person doesn't believe, or that person doesn't have faith. And I think in a large sense, for me as Russ Rapp, as a person, it is an issue of faith and a lack thereof in general. And the reason why I bring this up is because I guess my hope is, by you hearing my perspective on the matter, it'll help you understand that it's not about a person. It's not about becoming something or achieving something. And I've said that before, but it's like, you still, people hear that and just chalk it up to, well, this Russ Rapp doesn't know what he's talking about, or he's not enlightened, or he's this or that, or he just has it all wrong, or he hasn't taken enough, certain kind of hallucinogenic drugs, or whatever the case may be. And therefore, someone else may have the answer, or someone else has that. But I guess if you can assume someone else in the world has achieved some sort of status of the self falling away, or enlightenment, or whatever you want to call it. I don't care the word, but you know what I'm talking about. If they've achieved that, then me bringing up the fact that I don't believe it, that I'm not enlightened, that proves the fact that it has nothing to do with someone, because then that shows that there is someone outside of yourself that hasn't achieved it. And then you can take that a step further and say, well, then the assumption is that the duality of that is someone else has not achieved it. So Russ Rapp's an idiot. Speaking of myself in third person, the flip side of that coin, the duality of that is that someone has achieved it. And whether you identify as that someone, or you identify in some other enlightened guru or speaker or whatever, proves the point that your belief in non-duality is centered on achieving some sort of experience, or becoming some sort of person, or losing yourself and becoming a non-person. So that is what is being sought after. And that's just another belief. Whereas non-duality is unique in the sense that it doesn't require anything. It's an aspect, it's a description of reality, a way the world functions, if you will, in a sense. Where it has nothing to do with your levels of development, or your spiritual attainment, or personal development, or anything like that. And that's what makes it unique. So what is it then? What is non-duality? Because if it's nothing of value, then what's the point? How do I get meaning out of all of this? What's the purpose? Maybe in a sense, it's the purpose is to show the illusion, to show the duality, to show your lack of faith, to show my lack of faith, to bring up, to bubble up to the surface those things that you've been denying. I know, I don't know, like a week or so ago, there was a moment, and this is a horrible story, and it's probably why I don't tell many stories, because I'm bad at it. But there was a moment, I don't know what the deal was, but I was talking to my wife, and I responded to something that she had said, and like the tone was almost like, I don't know if I was in a certain mood, it was almost like juvenile, and it felt like it was like in that couple seconds I like regressed to some like previous period in my life of feeling like a kid, where you kind of at the mercy of the adults' whims and wishes and rules, and maybe the emotional maturity isn't there. And it was such a minor thing, but like I heard the voice of me as like a kid, sort of, and then it changed, and now I'm back to me as me in the current state. And I think with that is, we develop and grow. And if you think non-duality has something to do with what you can achieve or what you can become, then it has, like, if it's something that you can now let go, there was a time when that wasn't true. And so even if it's a matter of, and I've explained this all before, but even if it's a matter of you versus someone else having something you don't have, so like in space, in the 3D world, in the present of Russ Rapp's an idiot, some other guru has the answer, and I have the answer because I follow that, or I don't because I'm not living up to that. Even in time, the whole idea of non-duality, meaning that you're achieving something or becoming something, falls away, because then it's a matter of, when I was a kid, I didn't have something. Now I have something, and the future hasn't happened yet, but the future is always the present, so none of that matters, or the past is an illusion. And so you can kind of rationalize it in a way to say, well, the past wasn't real, but in a sense, it was real. The experience of the past, you can still see in the current, in the present, because of other people's present experience. You can observe children, you can watch people going through struggles, or, all sorts of things that fall short of the perception of what a non-dual adherent would look like. And that in itself proves to you that your belief about non-duality is untrue. So it's a kind of a dismantling of the BS. Like I've said before, it's like a mirror that you can hold up to yourself to say, I believe this, and you can question that, and you can kind of see through that. But that which is appearing continues to appear in from one moment to the next, or maybe it doesn't in the way that you think it would, in a sense. And that's probably what the experience that other speakers talk about as far as the falling away is. There's a way of behaving, there's a habit that has been with someone maybe their whole life, or maybe just a large part of their life, or whatever, of how they perceive the world, how they interact or react to the world. And that changes in a short moment. If it's throughout or developed over time, then it seems like a gradual form of development. And you can chalk it up to something that you did personally, or maybe there's some technique or whatever you use. But when it's instantaneous, when it's like that, and you have this moment of gnosis, of awakening, of epiphany, and all of that seems to fall away in that instant, and then that carries on into the future, then it seems like something happened and it was instantaneous versus something happening gradually over time. And therefore, that becomes a thing in of itself that people are seeking. And so I've said this, well, okay, let me just give a generic example. So let's say, there's someone who speaks on non-duality. He used to who used to have like anger issues, and they would, react negatively towards people, or, curse out people at the grocery store, or do things that are maybe not beneficial. And then they found non-duality, things changed. So now you hear this messenger, this person talking about non-duality, and you get it, and you look up to this person, try to emulate that person. And the idea is that once non-duality or non-dual awareness becomes permanent, then everything is perfect. But then later on in life, time goes by, and that person has an event, or maybe some sort of form of Alzheimer's or whatever, and then they regress back into the behavior, the attitude of being an angry person, and not being able to control their anger and their outbursts and stuff like that. And therefore, people become disillusioned with the message of non-duality, because the messenger that they looked up to no longer follows the trend, the habit that they have seen over a period of time. And it's kind of like the obsession of, especially in, I think, this culture, and maybe that's even changing, but the idea of celebrity and building up someone, putting them on a pedestal of being above everyone else, and somehow being like, the part of the elite group. And then there's always this tendency to start hating them for it, hating for their high horse or their ivory tower, and trying to tear them down. So oftentimes we build up celebrity is way cooler than everyone else and so great and beautiful, and then all of a sudden something shifts and now we hate them for what we projected onto them in the first place. And so I think when there's such a focus on the messenger itself, the message of non-duality gets lost. And is there a benefit to this? Maybe, maybe not. There's, the future in itself is constantly laid out in front of us moment to moment. So we never really know what is going to happen. And so that's where I think faith comes a long way. And so to me, it's my lack of demonstration of faith doesn't negate the message of non-duality, because the forgiveness, the love, the connection that is inherent in the message is always there, whether I believe it or not. Jonas Jensen says, this is from a while ago, I think, but he says, I was told I could reach enlightenment and essentially spend the rest of my life high on oneness and cosmic love and whatever. That's what I'm in non-duality for. Sounds good, yeah. That's why I think when I first started doing these YouTube videos, that my intention was to, since I'm somewhat of a contrarian, I wanted to make really high packaged, salesy type videos, because it was a contrast to the, semi-comatose, rambling, long form live talks like I do now. Because it would show the other side of the coin in a sense. And, that's why I think it's great when there is this like message of reaching enlightenment and being high on oneness and cosmic love, because in a lot of cases that's what people are seeking, yet they don't want to admit it to themselves. And so a lot of times it's packaged in a way to seem like it's not doing that, but at the same time that's the promises that are being made, which, I don't know why things happen the way they do. I don't know what the future holds. I don't know what this stage in my life is producing within me. I just know that you just got to keep moving forward wherever that leads. That's why I make these videos, whether I'll make them in the future or not, is, through all the struggle, it's, I think it's kind of the dualistic nature within me of, I know what I'm saying is true, if you want to call it that, but at the same time, I don't believe it. So there's a dualism within me, I think, that seems to exist, but one is not true and the other one is. But there's no necessity for you to remove the splinter in your mind, or whatever you want to call it, the level of unease, anything that you see as being a problem. There's always this desire to try to remove it to get to the state of bliss or peace. And non-duality is saying that the peace of existence is already there. And it's kind of like, through this process, I've noticed that oftentimes our perspective is so small, a lot of times it's all about us, that it's easy for me to get angry about stupid small stuff when I lose sight of kind of the bigger picture. And, the grace of God in those moments where I'm ungrateful, I think, is reflective of non-duality. Beach Bum, welcome. Beach Bum says, I have been practicing non-duality for a few years and I'm also a Christian. They seem to be compatible, but I'm not sure. What do you think? Well, Beach Bum, I'm a Bible thumper. I always thought that term was funny, Bible thumper. Um, no, I'm a Christian as well, and the really interesting part about non-duality when it comes to Christianity is if you reread the Bible, especially I think was it Ecclesiastes? I always forget. Um, there's so many things in here that point to kind of what non-duality is teaching. So there's a lot of non-dual teachings in the Bible itself. Yeah, Ecclesiastes, that's a real non-dual book of the Bible. I guess I don't know how to practice non-duality other than question my own BS, I guess, and try to forgive myself or ask for forgiveness. I don't know how to necessarily practice non-duality, because non-duality is what's appearing. It's not something that you can, I don't know. Because like I said, if somehow, let's say you meditate and now you're at peace and you see things for what they are, it's all about you having a certain type of experience or being able to go with the flow of life. But with that as a belief that you have this sort of type of experience or state of awareness, then the flip side of that, the duality of that, is that someone else doesn't. And objectively, you could look at someone else having a real rough time or throwing a fit or, having a panic attack as not being non-dual, if you will. But non-duality is showing that um, even those in those moments, even people that are struggling, are still non-dual, if you want to call it that, just as much as you are. It's not something that, even though they don't recognize it necessarily, it's still they're part of the kingdom of God, if you want to call it that. They're God's children, though they may not recognize it. Because if it's become something that you and having a certain experience, then the assumption is that other people don't, and then that's not non-duality, that's duality, which is what we experience as human beings. Merk Goff says, hello, sometimes the expectation for an extraordinary experience or event is a major obstacle. Sometimes I fail to notice that suffering is actually very diminished. It's often not that obvious. Let me read that again. Murkoff says, hello, sometimes the expectation of an extraordinary experience or event is a major obstacle. Sometimes I fail to notice that suffering is actually very diminished. It's often not that obvious. Okay, I think I know what you're saying now. So it's kind of like, I think in last week when I was watching Eagle Brook Church, the pastor used an analogy of a parachute when it comes to having a belief in Jesus. And it's kind of the idea is if I were to offer you a parachute and you were standing on a sidewalk and you had 6 inches to jump down to, you wouldn't understand the necessity of a parachute. It would seem pointless because functionally it wouldn't really seem to do anything for you. But if we were up in an airplane, however many feet above the earth, and it was going down and I offered you a parachute, you would say, I would assume you would say yes, and you would put it on and there wouldn't be much questioning. And so I think a lot of times people that enjoy talking about non-duality have had that extraordinary experience where they are up in the plane and the parachute is given and they speak to that. Whereas the smaller events or experiences are maybe attributed differently or not given the same weight as the big event. Because if your example is you get mad sometimes, but nothing really comes of it, and all of a sudden that goes away, it doesn't maybe seem as life-changing as something like, like Paul Hederman, who was addicted to drugs and did all this other stuff, and now he's no longer that way. Therefore, it's easy to see, I guess, the fruit of forgiveness, the truth of non-duality, the grace of God. And so in those moments where it's diminished and not obvious, it's sometimes hard to attribute it to what it is. And so we'll attribute it to something that we did, or take credit for it, or define it, or create some story around it, however we want to kind of package it up in our understanding of the situation. Part of me wants to just, because I got some dishes to do. I made a video of non-duality and doing the dishes, and that was fun. But I could just keep this running, go do the dishes, but you probably wouldn't get much value or excitement out of that, because if I don't respond to your chats or appear on camera or talk, then it seems like, well, what's the point of this? But maybe that's the the message you need in this moment. I don't know. There's always this idea of, well, what's the point? What's the answer? What's the reason for this? And I think, we kind of narrow our viewpoint into trying to find the one thing, the one answer, whereas it may be more complex or have more depth to what is happening, that we may not have a real understanding. We don't understand the workings of the world and how we interact. So, if there's an experience, especially with other people, is they're going to react to it in a certain way, in a different way. You're going to have your own takeaway from the experience. And what you take away from that may be different from someone else, even in the same predicament. And that's where you don't really understand how this all plays together, or what the point of it is, because of our limited awareness. So there's a lot of talk of non-duality about awareness, and it's always about expanding this, but the awareness is this. It's all of this. But we as individuals, as humans, don't have control over that, so it's frustrating. We don't have omniscience to know the purpose of things, the reality of what is. We can just suppose. So part of me, has an assumption about why I make these videos. So why do you make these non-duality videos? Why do you do these live talks? I think it's good practice to speak to a little black dot when I am engaged enough to try to focus directly into the camera, like I'm talking to you directly, even though it's just a laptop with a little camera on it, and learn how to speak without saying so it's kind of a practice of public speaking. So maybe I can use that down the road for whatever reason, which I'm not even sure why, but it's things like that where I can make a supposition on that as a reason. It's something that I'm maybe getting out of this indirectly. But there may be more to it that I'm not even aware of. Maybe there's a purpose that I don't know. And so it's kind of asking the question, but it's really having faith to say, I don't know. I don't know what's going to happen. I don't know what the meaning of this is, but I have faith to allow it to be. Jonas Jensen says, you repeat the point a lot that attaining anything non-dual is inherently dual. Does the same not apply to talking about the concept, i.e. there is a duality to knowing about it versus not knowing? You repeat the point a lot that attaining anything non-dual is inherently dual. Does the same not apply to talking about the concept, i.e. there's a duality to knowing about it versus not knowing? I guess if people have never come to this topic, because I mean, what's happening right now? This is in a sense a dialogue. One could argue that it's more of a monologue where I'm the one doing the verbal talking into a camera, and you are receiving the messaging, interpreting it, whatever. If we didn't have the chat, that would definitely seem more like a monologue, even though there's an appearance, an illusion that I'm talking to you when I look into the camera, or if I talk to you directly. If I say your name specifically, then there's this illusion that I'm talking to you. But ultimately, I'm sitting in my kitchen dining room talking to a laptop with a microphone and sitting by a window. That's what's happening. But dialogue itself, if you look at the word dialogue, di means two, so it's two-way communication, and the chat is a one way to understand that is happening in a sense. But even if it's me on a stage talking to an audience, there's always a two-way, there's always a sender and a receiver. It's always a dualism. So the conversation, the talking itself is always dualistic. And so these conversations talking about the concept is always dualistic in the sense that I'm talking to you through this technology. There's an awareness of that, but how, but there's a, but it's the same thing. It's whether we're talking about how to fix a car, or the best way to mow your lawn, or how to take care of a tree or an animal, or cooking tips. Like, it's still the same conversation that seems to be dual. And so the conversation itself, whether we're talking about a concept called non-duality and these words that I'm choosing in our language to represent a certain thing, it's still the same process. It's still the same conversation. So really, if no one hears these words, or no one hears the term "there is no person," or separation is illusion, or whatever however you want to coin it, it's real and unreal. None of it changes anything. It doesn't really make a difference. And so we could talk about anything under the sun, and that's, I think, one of the lines from Ecclesiastes, where it's things happen under the sun, but nothing really changes, and it's meaningless. And so that's where, if you hear non-duality or don't, or hear what it means and you just don't care, it doesn't really change anything. So Jonas says, you're engaging in being non-dual in a way. I guess it's kind of like the duality of anger versus graciousness, or being grateful. Whereas you can see the same circumstances, and it's obviously there's more ways to react to things, but just to think of it in a simple matter, you can think of it dualistically as, my car broke down and this is bad because why, or my car broke down and this is good because of this reason. And then there's a story that usually goes along with it, but the car breaking down, that occurrence is the same situation, or reaction to it is different. And so where was I going with that? Jonah says you're engaging in being non-dual in a way. Oh, that's my point. Okay, so so as human beings, the cosmic joke is, you can't understand fully, you can't know non-duality from the perspective of the separate self. You always see the world in the form that it takes as a dualism of objective 3D reality, however you want to coin it. And so, speaking about non-duality is always going to be done in the matrix, if you will. It's always going to be done in the apparent world that seems to exist. And so, whether I talk about non-duality or not is of no consequence, because there's no way to really even talk about it, if that makes sense. So I can point out things that maybe can be called into question, that you make assumptions or hold on to or attach to. But at the end of the day, you can see this world that we live in as a prison that you can't get out of. So like for people like the first Matrix, because it's the hero story, it's the becoming God, it's becoming the one, if you will. So it's Neo becoming, seemingly all powerful or saving the day. And people could relate to that because we love the hero story. We love Homer and all that stuff, the Iliad and the Odyssey and all that. So it's something that we as human beings attach to, and there's somewhat of a hero story in non-duality through the guru, if you will, or the wise teacher. But the assumption, I think, for a lot of viewers on the Matrix is that the Matrix literally was the prison. It's something that the machines created to imprison human beings, lock them up in the pods, to use them for energy purposes, and to keep them under control, if you will. So it was a way to enslave the human population. And from that standpoint, that makes sense. But if you see the story of the Matrix, especially if you look at, I haven't quite come to terms with the new one, but if you look at the trilogy in itself, people tended to not quite grasp, I think, the purpose of the second two Matrix films, 2 and 3, because it didn't follow the same exact hero path that we're used to. And if you see the Matrix movies as an allegory, as a story, as a mythos, if you will, then it's easier to understand what the Matrix is, not as a prison, but as an aspect of reality, of our experience. And so when you say, or when I say that there's no way to understand non-duality, there's no way to truly know it objectively, because we're stuck in this 3D realm of perception, of sensation and perception, of human perspective, that you can't see it. So, when we talk about the observer self, we think, okay, so if I observe my thoughts, if I observe my feelings, emotions, my actions from another standpoint, then I'm observing that which is not real. So I objectify my previously attached to reality. And so that observer self becomes the thing that I try to become. But that in itself is part of the attachment that's already happened. And I know Paul Hederman talks about this, where it's like, you can't get out of yourself. You can't free yourself from yourself as yourself. And because the attachment's already taken place. And the analogy I thought of yesterday, I think it was what was the analogy? Oh boy, it's probably slipped my mind. So it wasn't that important, but oh, that's what it was. Oh yeah. Okay, so typing on a keyboard, or it's like riding a bike, but in this case, I'm going to say typing on a keyboard. So when you first learn to type on your keyboard, you have to learn. So there's, you got QWERTY, you got the QWERTY, UIOP, whatever on the top row, and then it goes on from there. That was created. That was a structure that was created, and you didn't create it, I'm assuming, because that person's no longer with us. But that's been continued as a habit of how they develop keyboards. And when you first start learning, it's a slow process. They teach you how to use this finger for that one, this finger for that one, and not do the 1 point, boom, boom, boom keyboard where you're looking at the keys because you don't know where they are. So eventually the point of learning how to type is that you can do it without looking, without really even thinking. And so it becomes instinctual. It's something that you try to do initially, you try to learn. It's the process of kind of making the conscious subconscious, making it become instinct, where you're typing on the keyboard and you no longer even picturing the keyboard. It's just, the letter and it just happens. But that itself is built into that process. So the end result is that you can type without even really picturing in your mind. Like when I'm typing, I'm not picturing in my mind which keys I'm hitting. It's just, I think of a word and it comes out. So the awareness of that habit that has been learned is like become aware of the habits of the mind body, if you will. But before that is the picture, the training that happened prior to that, that we're not aware of, or we don't actively manifest conceptually. So like the attachment, the concept of self is something that happens that we can question, but the part prior to that is already ingrained, if you will, and we can't get to that part, because in the act of thinking through the typing, that in itself is part of the conscious awareness. We can't see the subconscious, because when the subconscious comes into awareness, it becomes conscious, if you will. Oh man, that was super word salad. But I guess what I'm trying to say is there's a subconscious aspect to the attachment to self that is there prior to our interpretation of the self, our attachment intellectually or conceptually of the self. Just like animals, they don't think about necessarily, I'm assuming, their existential reality, but they still act in ways to protect their sentience, or to survive in the world. So they'll protect their young, they'll protect themselves, they'll eat to survive, and all those things that are instinctual, which is an act of duality, where it's me versus the world, or it's I need to do this or kill this animal to eat and survive, and that sort of thing. And so it's not something that's really conceptualized, but that attachment is already there. I think that was the analogy I was going for, something to that effect. Novea says, why did Matrix movie use mantras from Upanishads? I'm trying to think. I'm not as versed on the Upanishads, so maybe you can explain. I'm trying to picture what that would be. I think there's a lot of different kind of spiritual teachings mixed into the Matrix, in a sense, kind of both Eastern and Western. The kind of the Christ story. I mean, it was pretty obvious when Neo apparently died in the Matrix, and then in real life they had the light that looked like a cross on his chest. That was pretty much an obvious nod to him being a Christ-like figure. Where was I going with the attachment to self? Oh, so there's this desire to fix, to get rid of the attachment that we find ourselves in. But if you come to terms with the fact that the attachment exists beyond your control, that you can actually go and change that, the attachment already has happened, then that can be perceived in a negative way as a prison, as the Matrix. Whereas the flip side of that is understanding the illusion of it and seeing the freedom of it all, the unmanifest nature of non-duality, the non-self, seeing the self for what it is, seeing the attachment, and instead of believing it to be ultimately true, to be absolutely true, seeing it for what it is, a temporary state of being that shifts and changes and lives and dies, and in that sense is meaningless, because we have to give it its own meaning. We have to try to make it solid. We have to try to make it manifest in order to give it some illusion of reality. So that's kind of the trick of the devil in itself, is to gain knowledge of the world and try to make that which is illusion real. But God's kingdom is the only thing that's real. And so what does that manifest as? As do as thou wilt, this deep sense of selfishness, in the negative sense of trying to gain the world by giving up your own soul, doing any means necessary, doing anything to achieve some sort of immortality or certain kind of status, immemorial, trying to have power over others in the negative sense, versus being a leader, being a servant leader like Jesus Christ is and was. It's a matter of having desires, earthly, carnal desires, being elevated above spiritual sustenance, if you will. It's Jesus being tempted by the devil. So I don't know if Novea, you're still there, but I'd be curious on your Upanishads comment, if you can just clarify a little bit. It's been a while since I've seen the three of the first trilogy, so I don't quite remember all the details. I've read some books on it and theory and different things, and I've talked about that other videos. Oh, I did want to mention, in case you're looking for other people that talk about non-duality that maybe you would find interesting to hear what they have to say. I was listening a little bit more time this weekend to listen to some non-dual speakers, and one woman named Mandy Ramsdell, she puts out a lot of videos on non-duality, and I think her most recent one, I'll give you the name of it, I suppose. It was something I found beneficial in the moment that I find myself. I wonder if I can watch myself. Oh, probably not. I wonder if I can watch myself doing a live talk. Let's see. Okay, so her latest video was non-duality and that underlying sense of unease. So that was somewhat of an inspiration for this video, this live talk for me today in this moment. So check her out. I think seems to come from an authentic place in covering this topic. So I'm going to go on YouTube where I'm not signed in and see if I can watch myself. Oh, how interesting. Is there a delay? 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 How trippy was that? Let's see. Jonas Jensen says the song Navras from Matrix Revolutions features quotes from the Upanishads. Okay. Yeah, I think they are probably well versed, the Wachowskis, in all sorts of spiritual teachings. They seem to have a pretty good grounding in it because they're able to take these big ideas and weave them into a coherent story through a certain type of a journey to, I think, in a allegory that is entertaining for people to watch. Especially, people love the first one. The second and third one was not quite as well. Maybe the second one I think people liked, but I think overall, I think people enjoyed the films, and that's the tough part of taking all those big ideas where people are focused on kind of your basic, here's a hero, here's a good-looking, strong man, or there's a beautiful woman, and here's a cheap laugh, here's a one or maybe two-dimensional bad guy, and there's a story of triumph, and it's pretty basic. Your typical Hollywood big budget film. There's not much depth to them. It's just action, 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 a little bit of preposition. Is that the right word? So to be able to take all these kind of big ideas, including the Upanishads, and weave them into a story that can make money on a large scale is, definitely a feat. That was like an audio. That was like an audio version of the of those mirrors, like the room of mirrors where you see like yourself ad infinitum. So it goes on for infinity because of the way the mirrors are set up. You know, when I listened to myself talking, it was like this constant loop repeating itself. Kind of like the mirrors, but it was almost similar in the sense that when you see, you know, maybe this is the limitation of your visual acuity, but you know, if you look far into the mirrors, as you get further away, you can see less detail just because you're not able to, just in general with eyesight. But you know, I don't know if you could tell, but on the audio, it kept through the replication, through the repetition of that became less clear, became more muddled, and I think that's to some extent a good analogy for the idea of peeling back the onion and having all these layers on top of layers of how we interact with the world. And if those layers are removed or we see through them, then we see more of an essential nature, which is what I think people are seeking, because the source has more clarity than the habitual repetition of attachment. Well, we're about at an hour here. Other things I want to accomplish today. So, any final thoughts here? Nothing. We got nothing. That's it. Oh, here we go. Beach Rum says, "Thanks for your thoughts." Well, see you next time. Well, thanks. If there is a next time, sometimes at some point there won't be a next time. I don't know when that is. But whether I do this or not, you'll be okay. And thank you all for joining today in this moment. Whether you're watching this after the fact, I applaud you for watching or listening to an hour of me talk. Jonas says, "Thoughts are bad," said the wise man. Thoughts are thoughts. That's what thoughts are. Chris Langevelt says, "Beach Mom, I have been practicing non-duality for a few years and I'm..." Oh. I think Chris... What? Oh. Oh, I think Chris is responding to Beach Mom. I don't know. Chris says, I don't think so, Beach Mom, as you have to account for no free will. Well, I think, if you want to look at it, we speak of free will versus fate in conversation, in discussion, and that in itself is dualistic. So the conversation itself is predicated on a belief in duality, much like any topic, any discussion of this is. It's always a duality. and it's coming from a certain perspective. One way you can say, is there fate or free will? You can say, is there fate and free will? Is there both? Is it a matter of perspective? I think I talked about this last time, but it's a matter of, we, in order to, like, if you have a debate with someone, there's certain rules or criteria that you determine going into it, or things that you can agree on as being the basis of the conversation prior to the discussion, in order to have a beneficial conversation, if you will. And so if someone says, Russ, do the dishes, and I say, well, there is no Russ and there is no dishes, I'm not playing the game of the illusion of dishes, and it makes me look like a jerk. And so we all play a role. We are on the stage, the movie set. We're all actors in a sense, and yet we're more than that. So free will and fate or destiny, it's both. But I guess the question is, whose will do you follow, and which one brings you peace and which one brings you suffering? Thank you all for joining. Romans 8:28, and we know that in all things God works for the good of those who love him, who have been called according to his purpose.